black 5 with Delve is already on the cusp of something you can play in a tournament deck, and Tesker's activated power is no small deal.
2 copies of that card in Peter's deck list this week, and he's number 27 on our Season 1 leaderboard, which means he had a bye coming into this weekend, but Jim had 2, and he's taking a much more traditional approach to his take on Sultai Delver. 4 Deathrights, 4 Delvers, 4 Tarmogoyfs, 3 Dark Confidants, and a Trine Nemesis are the creatures he is working with here. You see a couple copies of Days along with the Force Will in Jim's hand as we will be underway here in round number 3 shortly. Do appreciate you joining us at home. Cedric Phillips, Patrick Sullivan bringing you all the action here from Indianapolis as we have 9 rounds of Legacy action today, 6 tomorrow. You throw in 3 elimination rounds. We'll crown 1 of 3 champions tomorrow. Someone's walking out of here with $5,000, 25 Open Series points, an invite to our Season 1 Invitational, and it could be Peter Tragos as we see a Gitaxian Probe.
Also, another thing to keep in mind with Tasigur in this format, let's think about the removal spells that get played. There's a lot of bolts. There's a lot of copies of Abrupt Decay. Those cards do not touch Tasigur. And when you're able to put a 1-mana threat into play that can avoid Abrupt Decay and Lightning Bolt, that's already a good foundation for a Legacy card. Yes, Swords to Plowshares catches it, but the same is true of nearly every creature in the format. So
yeah, it is rare that you can have a creature that can fade, those 2 big removal spells. I was, think of Tarmogoyf, for example. Bolt, oftentimes not going to kill it, very rare that it does, but Abrupt Decay, of course, handles it very easily, as here's a Delver of Secrets. So I'm interested to see how Tasigur will play out, assuming that Peter does draw it over the course of this match. But it should be a good one here in round number 3 between these 2 fantastic players, as Tragos does have a Delver of Secrets. Davis considering a Force of Will here, as he does have that card along with 2 copies of Days in hand.
And Jim's hand here is at risk of not finding a second land drop here, at which point Abrupt Decay is no longer an answer. So even though it's ugly to Force of Will here, you've already mulliganed. Peter could have a Days of his own for all you know. I think Jim does have to do this because his draw fails too high of a percentage of the time to allow Delver to resolve in this spot.
There is Force of Will. Removing Days. It will take care of Delver's Secrets, and it'll pass the turn back. Spell Pierce the draw here for Davis. One thing you also have to keep in mind now too is in the previous format when Treasure Cruise was around, Stifle, not a big player in the format, Wasteland, not a big player in the format, but both of those things have certainly changed.
Yeah, you're going to see a lot more of these mana denial sort of strategies. We think typically of Temur Delver as having that sort of setup, but you can easily incorporate those cards into Sultai Delver. You can also see Loam plus Wasteland strategies come back. You're going to see a lot more of that kind of stuff now with Treasure Cruise out of the format.
Now, oftentimes in Sultai Delver, you don't find Stifle. You typically find it in Temur Delver, and you very rarely, if ever, find it in Jeskai Delver. But taking a look at both of these deck lists, both players do actually have 3 copies of the card, which makes for an interesting game, I think, where, I wouldn't be surprised if both players are playing Stifle in their in their Sultai Delver decks to say, I'm going to catch, my opponents off guard. They're not expecting it. However, both of them have it in their deck, so that might be kind of on their radar where it wouldn't be otherwise.
I'm especially interested by its inclusion in Peter's deck because from my deck building philosophy, once Tasigur is in my deck, I just want as much stuff that I can play, that I can just cast all the time. I don't want situational cards in my hand, so Peter must really want Stifle in his list if he's willing to play it alongside Tasigur.
Scalding Tarn the draw here for Davis. Does have a Dark Confidant, Abrupt Decay, a Daze, and a Spell Pierce in his hand to go along with the newly minted fetch land. So we'll see how he wants to move forward here. Certainly not moving very quick. Jim, a very methodical player.
But if you're if you're experienced with Legacy, this setup from Peter here kind of has the stink of Stifle, pondering and not really doing anything and leaving a mana up. It appears that Peter does not have it, though.
Now, it looks like Jim is clear for takeoff. Now, of course, when you are playing in a format where Wasteland is certainly back in it, like this one is, you do have to be very careful when you're searching up what lands you want to find. So Jim going to go with an Underground Sea and a Tropical Island at this point.
But these Sultai builds typically have such sensitive mana, and they're playing Wasteland, that they just can't afford basics. It does stink now that Wasteland's a little more prevalent for some of these strategies, but you can't afford to draw an island or draw a swamp when you're trying to cast colored mana spells that are this sensitive.
Tragos going to draw a card for the turn. His Dark Confidant is in, so we'll see if he has a card like Abrupt Decay to get that off of the table. He is playing 4 copies this weekend. I think that's a card that's going to see a big incline moving forward.
Oh, yeah. It was a card that, it's efficient and it's flexible, but in a Treasure Cruise world, it's not a big payoff.
There is a Tropical Island.
When all of your opponents' permanents are interchangeable and they're drawing a bunch of cards, paying 2 mana for a flexible removal spell doesn't make a lot of sense. But now, I would expect to see Abrupt Decay in force.
There's Wasteland. There's Tarmogoyf. So no decay here for Peter. Just the very large Lurgoyf, which means we're going to have to go reaching for the Tarmogoyf die here in just a moment to see how big that thing is. Been a while since we brought that out.
Yeah, I mean, this is really just a featuring of cards and decks that were on the decline with Treasure Cruise that I would expect to see a lot more of. You know, Deathrite Shaman, the draw here for Jim. Another card, much the same story.
Yeah, and Dark Confidant, too.
Yeah, Dark Confidant's a great example.
Dark Confidant, the reveal there.
You want to play this card in the Treasure Cruise Fort Bolt world? No, probably not. Young Pyromancer, pretty good against Dark Confidant.
Yeah, not bad. Not bad. There is Deathrite Shaman. So Jim not able to find a land, but able to play a Deathrite Shaman, which acts as a land in a situation like this.
And you feel like Jim's got a really, really big edge here if he can find a second land and Abrupt Decay this Tarmogoyf. He's got a card advantage, Engine Online. You know, most likely Peter would have killed it last turn if he could.
There's another Wasteland. Timely there. It's been a while since we've seen this type of game in Legacy.
Yep.
Here comes Tarmogoyf. It was so strange to see the Blue-Red Delver decks kind of cut this card, but after watching Bob and Wang Wing in New Jersey and its performance over the handful of months where Treasure Cruise was legal, it did make sense. The deck was very color sensitive.
Yes, and it was, you know, Treasure Cruise was just such a big payoff that's all the deck was about.
And now here's Tassiger, and you can see how easy that is to cast. It is kind of, it's weird because it's like a Nambo with Tarmogoyf, but at the same time, it's perfectly fine because Tarmogoyf uses both graveyards.
Also, while we're on the topic of non-bows there, Force of Will and Dark Confidant, while you're behind on the board, not the best for a variety of reasons.
Not great, no?
Not great.
Jim's hand is full. He's got 6 spells in hand. However, he is missing lands, and that's the issue right now. And, you know, this is a situation where Tasker, its ability may never go active this game, but having a 1-mana 4/5, well, that's plenty good.
Yeah, and, you know, the Tassiger Tarmogoyf here is much the same story as we've seen with, you know, Tarmogoyf and Deathrite Shaman in the same deck, which people initially critiqued.
Yeah.
You know what? Your opponent's going to cooperate in Legacy. We know this. They're going to fill up their graveyard too. So Peter is able to delve a Tassiger into play while keeping his Tarmogoyf at the same size. We're going to see a lot of that.
Here's a Brainstorm for Jim. 3 cards coming. 2, of course, will have to go back. 2 Tarmogoyfs to draw along with a Wasteland, so he's finally found a land, but this Wasteland he'll have to likely use for mana.
Well, Jim's on chump blocking detail, and I don't know if he can really get out. This situation requires 2 spells a turn for him to get out of, and I think he's going to be hard-pressed to do that.
Seems as though it's going to be really, really difficult now.
He's got to chump block this turn, fall to 2. He has no way to shuffle his deck, so he's working with what he has here. Peter's still got cards in his hand.
And the land, and the other thing too is no fetch land in any of this.
Yeah,
he
has what he has.
Yeah. Brainstorm done resolving. Wasteland going to come into play. And we might have ourselves a situation here where Jim is just going to try to pick up some information.
Yep. Might see a removal spell, may see, you know, some piece of information.
Yep. Because I think it's very unlikely that he wins this game, and I think he knows that, but no reason not to just play it out. If you pick up information on a card like Disfigure or something, maybe it adjusts the way that you want to sideboard. Now taking a look at Peter's deck list. His deck list is actually fairly straightforward. A lot of 4s and 3 ofs, and then, you know, 2 Spell Pierces in the main, 3 Probes, 3 Stifles, excuse me, and then 2 Tassigers. So nothing too crazy going on here for Peter.
Yeah, it's a very lean deck game 1. He's not playing with that much reactive stuff besides the counter spells.
There's a 3rd Wasteland. Wasteland's going to take care of Wasteland, but we'll have a little Wasteland standoff. And now Peter will come into the red zone. There's a chump block of Tassiger. Davis going to go down to 3. Spell Pierce the draw. And after one more healthy attacker, I believe, from Peter, we should be good to go for game number 2. And we are. So Peter Tragos is going to win game 1 here over Jim Davis in the Sultai Delvermere as we move on to the sideboards. We will start with Jim as he goes reaching into his deck box to find a Maelstrom Pulse. An Abrupt Decay. He's got 3 in the main, 1 in the sideboard. 2 Thought Seizes, a Grafdigger's Cage, a Force of Will, a Flusterstorm, a Vendilion Click, 2 copies of Divert, a Pithing Needle, a Surgical Extraction, 2 Marsh Casualties, and a Murderous Cut. What do we like here?
So anything that lets Jim play more efficiently, because these matchups do have a lot to do with Wasteland, Deathrite Shaman, Stifle, keeping your opponent taxed on mana. So I really like Vendilion Click in this matchup. My favorite card here is, in fact, the Murderous Cut, because it's just so cheap and so efficient. I think the additional copy of Abrupt Decay is very good here as well. It's possible that you see the Maelstrom Pulse come in, the couple copies of Divert if Jim anticipates spot removal spells or him to Torak, but the reactive spells that cost that much mana are challenging in the matchup because your mana is under duress.
Well, we'll take a look at Peter's sideboard here as well. A lot of 1s and 2s on Jim's side. How about Peter?
A lot more streamlined, a lot more redundant, much like his main deck. 3 copies of Flusterstorm, 2 copies of Liliana of the Veil, a Dismember, 2 Vendilion Clicks, 2 Grafdigger's Cage, 3 copies of Thoughtseize, 2 copies of Golgari Charm. So really love the 2 copies of Vendilion Click and the Dismember here, and I think the 2 copies of Liliana of the Veil are fine here as well.
Well, these players will shuffle up in sideboard and get ready for game number 2 of this mirror match. We'll take a look at the Season 1 Open Series schedule. Of course, we started things off in Columbus, moved our way towards Philadelphia. Then we went to D.C. last weekend where we saw Fabiano get the job done there, and now we are here in Indianapolis, and hopefully we don't get stuck as apparently there's some bad weather perhaps on the way.
There have been some rumblings, but hopefully we'll get out of here just fine. Next weekend is regionals. We have more information about that coming. Then Houston the weekend after that, Los Angeles after that. Our first ever Modern Open Series in Baltimore at the end of February. The following weekend will be at Grand Prix Miami. After that, we'll be heading to Dallas for an Open Series, and then 2 weeks later, the Season 1 Invitational in Richmond, Virginia. Standard and Legacy as the Invitational format, with a Standard Open Series. End of March, me, you, and Matthias Hunt in the booth.
It's going to be here before we know it.
Yes.
Well, it's not February yet. We got one more day, barely, to go before it is February 1st. And then it'll be March 27th through the 29th, and all of a sudden we'll be in April, and who even knows then. But that is Season 1. Our 4th event of the season, and the race has been interesting to watch. It's actually fluctuated quite a bit between Joe Lissette, Ross Merriam, and maybe here in a moment, Jim Davis.
And there's going to be some pressure here on Ross. Competing on the Pro Tour next weekend means he misses out on regionals.
Yep.
The following weekend is Houston. It's quite the schlep. The weekend after that is Los Angeles, where we know Joe is going to be there.
Of course.
So stone's throw away. Cross-country flight for Ross.
Now, for what it's worth, Ross has gone to Los Angeles Opens before. You've had a little experience battling him at one.
Yes.
So it's not out of the question for him to go.
But that was during a time where Ross was doing some sort of, magic tour of the country.
Yeah. So we also saw him in Portland one of those weekends as well. So
Yes.
It was surprising to see him on the West Coast, but he does have friends out there. It's certainly not out of the question, and I know that it's something he's thinking about doing as this race is only going to tighten up here. You have to imagine Joe's going to have a pretty good tournament this weekend playing Miracles. Does seem like it's well positioned, especially with Treasure Cruise out of the format. So we'll, of course, be tracking Joe, and I imagine watching him a couple times over the course of this weekend. But right now, spotlight's on Jim Davis, number 2 right now on the Open Series leaderboard. The potential to just have another good weekend. Jim has just been slogging away with good finishes. Did have a top 8 when we were in Columbus to start the year with blue-white control, but hasn't gotten that trophy. That's eluded him on the Open Series so far.
Yeah, he's been having really consistent finishes, as you mentioned, but not quite the win just yet.
Take a look at Jim's opening hand. 2 Wastelands, a Brainstorm. Looks like a Deathrite Shaman over there as well. Tarmogoyf and a Ponder. I don't know if I could mulligan that hand.
No, you would like, a fetch land maybe in this hand to give a little bit of juice to the Deathrite Shaman, but this is a very solid opening.
I just want to get him with Wasteland. 2 Wasteland hand?
Oh,
Where do
yeah.
I sign up? Here's a good taxiing room. Peter will have a better idea of what's going on now in just a moment. He sees a Brainstorm to begin, but I don't think he's going to like the rest of the cards he sees here momentarily.
Peter's deck naturally no basic lands in it, just wastelands, fetch lands, and dual lands. So these wastelands are going to be challenging to operate around.
See the attaching probe showing a Ponder, a Brainstorm, a Tarmogoyf, and then 2 Wastelands. And unsurprisingly, for both players, no basics hanging out.
Nope. Can't afford them. It's more of an issue of if you draw one of the basic lands, it's a disaster.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to have one in the deck to fetch for in certain situations, but the draw steps just can't handle them.
There's an Underground Sea.
And this is a pretty bad sign for Peter here as well if he's not able to lead with the fetch land. At least the fetch land would allow him to make some land drops and get to a spot where, you know, he can sack all of his fetch lands in one turn and cast something big. But it might indicate that Peter also has Stifle in hand.
Yep.
He's just trying to bait Jim into using this wasteland in the Underground Sea, getting to Stifle it, sending Jim back a land drop, and getting to his second mana.
What I find interesting about this situation here is that, again, Jim has Stifle in his deck list this weekend. So this is something that is going to be on Jim's radar as a result of him actually playing the card.
Right. Like this opening from Peter after a Gataxian Probe is just, you know, maybe he doesn't have Stifle in hand, but it's hard to believe.
Yeah. If he doesn't have Stifle, what does he have? Is he just willing to let his land go?
Well, he might have nothing.
Yep.
He may have no 1-mana play and no fetch land to play, but that seems unlikely.
So now it comes down to timing and how to go about using this wasteland. Because that's the land that Jim's going to play. And now here's a Ponder. So Ponder will resolve. Jim will take a look at a Spell Pierce, a Divert, and a Scalding Tarn.
And the Pierce is really the draw that I'm not sure if he's exactly looking for, but it does get the job done. Jim can sack the wasteland, target the Underground Sea. If Stifle gets cast, the wasteland is now in Jim's graveyard. He can remove it with the Deathbright Shaman to make a mana, Spell Pierce the Stifle, and get the wasteland to occur. And Divert's really sweet in this matchup.
Yeah.
So good against Abrupt Decay. And sometimes these decks have hymns, and that is also pretty sweet.
Jim going to keep with the Ponder, picks up the copy of Spell Pierce.
And you may want to do all this on Peter's upkeep rather than on his main phase right now. So even if Jim passes the turn, it doesn't mean he's giving up on that play.
And so the question he has to ask himself right now, too, is when exactly do I want to do this? Because he also, you know, he's working into the equation of my opponent has Stifle, but what happens if Peter doesn't have Stifle? When would you want to do it as well?
Well, I think you can still pass the turn. If Peter does something like Brainstorm, well, then the coast is clear and you fire off your wasteland, you're good. If Peter just untaps and goes to his draw step, then you probably want to do it in the upkeep.
So after some contemplation, Jim is actually just going to let Peter take a draw step here, too. So he's basically saying, do your worst.
And he might just be saying, you know, if he suspects that Peter is on Stifle here, he may get Peter to burn a second turn, playing a land and playing nothing, which may be the incentive here to not use the wasteland.
Jim going to respond now. There is wasteland. Now the question, I think, is will he Spell Pierce his Brainstorm or not?
I think so.
And it looks like he will. I like the sequencing there. Wastelanding first, then Spell Piercing, so the Daze doesn't work its way into the equation.
Exactly. Very, very tight play here from Jim.
Now Peter's going to Force of Will, removing a blue card to go after this Spell Pierce. And even if this Force of Will does resolve, I think if you're Jim, you're okay with this exchange of resources.
Oh, this is great. I mean, you know, you're getting a Force of Will out of your Spell Pierce, which is already a victory. And all that's doing is allowing Peter to resolve a Brainstorm with no action in play. I mean, you know, if Peter's hunting for land drops or whatever he's trying to do right now, this is all good news for Jim.
It is these battles that take place in Legacy, especially with the removal of Treasure Crews, that are a lot different now.
Right. Before, you know, you can do all this and then someone cruises and it's like all your work didn't matter, which is why people didn't really play these Sultai Delver decks for a while. Now these sort of trades are just super, super good for the person making them.
Flooded Strand will be sacrificed, so Peter will make it a perfect Brainstorm by putting those two cards back and then shuffling them away. He'll get a land out of his deck. But of course, the problem here for Peter is that he knows there's another wasteland on the way.
Not only that, but, you know, you mentioned there's another wasteland. Peter's only got one Underground Sea left in the deck for black mana. He's got 3 seas, 3 Trops, some fetch lands, and wastelands.
Sure.
So, You know, if something happens to this Deathrite Shaman and the sea gets tagged, he might just run out of black mana.
Yeah, and that's a real problem. Davis gonna draw. There's his divert. He knew that was coming from the ponder.
And Peter's taking taking a lot of risk and having some pretty bad stuff happen to him. And it's not even like as a result of this he's on a winning trajectory. The best case scenario is he just gets to play Magic.
And Jim is trying to stop him from doing that.
Exactly. Which these 3-color Delver decks are so good. You know, the specifics of the decks, they're all different, but these decks are about Wasteland, Daze, and possibly Stifle at their core.
There's Wasteland as a land drop. Here's Tarmogoyf.
And you can see Jim here is trying to set the trap with this divert.
Yeah.
He's making it really juicy here for Peter to go untap, Abrupt Decay your Tarmogoyf or your Deathrite Shaman. And if this divert resolves, especially with Jim having a Wasteland left over, Peter might be done for.
So 3-4 Tarmogoyf out there for Davis. And yeah, he is trying to hook him pretty good with the divert.
And it's such a good hook, too, because if you're in Peter's spot, you're thinking, why wouldn't he Wasteland me? What's the spell he's holding up? It's probably Spell Pierce, I guess. Trying to get my Planeswalker or something like that. All right, Abrupt Decay is great to cast here if he's holding up Spell Pierce, because he can't counter it. And then it's Divert, and it's all sorts of bad news.
And what's so interesting about this dynamic, too, is here's 2 mana, is that Divert isn't a card that we see a ton of in Legacy.
I think Jim might have hooked him in.
Yep. Here's Abrupt Decay going after Deathrite Shaman. And I would be surprised not to see Jim divert this.
Yeah. I mean, it's worth a moment of contemplation here.
Yeah, so what Peter's able to do, and this is actually really nice sequencing for him, is Jim activates Deathrite Shaman, and Peter, in response, activates his Deathrite Shaman. Now he's able to cast a Delver. So Jim's plan is a little bit foiled, and the reason for that is with the way that he tapped his mana.
Yeah, I guess he could have left up. He could have tapped, I guess, the Deathrite and the Wasteland.
Yeah, it's all a little interesting on how you go about tapping it, right? Because you're trying to conceal the fact that you have something to do. So there are costs in leaving up Tropical Island. There are costs in leaving up Deathrite Shaman. You know, if you just leave up Tropical Island and Peter plays a Wasteland and then starts a turn by Wasteland in the Tropical Island, things are way different. But all this means now is that Jim still has that divert in the holster, and we'll see if it does come up later.
Right. I mean, he's picked up a Tarn here, so he can get away from it if he wants to.
Stifle as well. There's also a Daze in there, too, so Jim's going to have to put 2 cards back with this Brainstorm. The Tarn pretty gosh darn important right now.
Yeah. I mean, his hand's a little fidgety right now. You know, it's definitely reactive, and there's cards like Stifle and Divert that maybe Jim can cast profitably, maybe not. So being able to shuffle away some of this stuff is really important.
It's so tough because you're trying to bottleneck your opponent on resources, so a card like Daze is very attractive. But this deck is also full of just 1 and 2 mana spells where Daze may never get the opportunity to do what you think it's going to do.
Yep.
And so that's where the brainstorming gets very, very difficult in this mirror match, because he's putting back Daze and Stifle, which are cards that on the first opening stages of the game, Jim would have loved to have those cards on turn 1 and turn 2 of this game, and now we're on, the 3rd turn of the game, and he's just like, I need to move past these.
Yeah, and he can't really Abrupt Decay, this turn because he's on colorless mana. So at that point, the mana denial playing gets really bad.
Yeah.
Peter's already got a Deathrite Shaman in play. Even if Jim Wastelands here, Peter's going to have a lot of resources to work with.
Looks like Jim is going to go Wastelanding. I suppose the question is, what will he Wasteland? Looks like he's going to go with Underground Sea yet again. And we are privy to the knowledge that Peter only has 3 Underground Seas in his hand, or in his deck, excuse me. So now he's left with just 1.
But even though Jim lost out on the Divert last turn by the way that he tapped things, he still has it this turn.
Yep.
And this is another spot where, if Peter's got a removal spell in hand, Jim's again representing Spell Pierce or some sort of like permission spell. And Abrupt Decay is a very attractive play here for Peter.
There's a Wasteland. And that looks like it's going to go up to Tropical Island. I missed this.
Stone Rain Mirror.
Yeah.
In its various shapes and sizes.
Yeah. It's been a long time. Deathrite's going to generate some mana here.
This is why I'm skeptical of any of the 3-mana spells. As good as they are, Vendilion Click, Liliana the Veil. I like the cards in the matchup, sort of. But so often the games just look like this, that how are you messing around with 3-mana spells?
There's Abrupt Decay. And as you said, even though things didn't go perfectly for Jim last turn with the Divert, because of the Deathrite Shaman interactions, he still has the Divert. It's not gone.
Yeah, he set this all up. I mean, it was predicated on Peter having another copy of Abrupt Decay to cooperate with, and if he had something else this turn, he just plays, land Liliana the Veil, Jim might be in huge trouble.
Oh, yeah.
But as it stands, this is happening, and now it is Peter who's in trouble.
So Divert's going to change the target of Abrupt Decay. We'll see if he wants to go after Delver of Secrets or Deathrite Shaman. If I'm in Jim's spot, I think I want to go after Deathrite Shaman and just cut the mana.
Just cut mana. You're ahead on life total. You have a Tarmogoyf against an unflipped Delver of Secrets. There's no way I'm giving Peter mana here.
Yeah. Not only are you lowering the amount of mana that he has, but you're also cutting off a color.
Yeah, this is all good news here for Jim.
Jim will take a draw. He's found another Abrupt Decay. His hand right now, 2 Abrupt Decays and a Brainstorm. The easy part, serving it with the Tarmogoyf. So that'll be an attack for 4. And as great as a card as Delver of Secrets is, doesn't beat Tarmogoyf in a fight. So we'll take a look at the top card here of Peter's deck.
It also means if it flips, it means Peter's not drawing a land.
Yep. Here's an attack for 1. There's a Polluted Delta. Very quick sacrifice here for Peter. There's the 3rd and final Underground Sea. And if he's sacrificing that quickly, presumably has a spell to cast.
I like Jim last turn not casting that Brainstorm here.
Yeah.
His hand's very good, so he doesn't really want to shuffle away anything. There's no guarantee he gets to shuffle away. And it's a hand that's very susceptible to getting Brainstorm locked. So I think Jim wants to give himself more looks at this point while he's doing as well as he is. Though, that has now changed.
So last week, I was a little skeptical of Tasigur in Standard. Wasn't sure how good it was going to be. I can safely say I was flat wrong. I was a little skeptical about it this week. And after watching it for 2 games, I'm in love.
Yep.
Oh,
A huge
that's
draw.
a big draw. That is a big draw, is that Murderous Cut from Davis. One of the few ways his deck can actually get out of this situation is a Murderous Cut off the top of his deck, and he has it. He'll have to devil away some cards of his own and ensure that he makes his Tarmogoyf stay very large, but that's a huge draw there.
Yeah, I mean, Jim's in all sorts of trouble there. He doesn't have the ability to get off the table. Yes, he can, his Tarmogoyf blocks for a while, but assuming that Delver the Secrets flips, Jim's under pressure. Even if he casts Abrupt Decay, well, now you're just staring at each other, and one person has his Tasigur in play.
There's a Tarmogoyf off the top. Delver's Secrets perhaps being a little frisky. Maybe not. So Davis with a solid hand here. He'll take a draw step. It's a copy of Stifle. He's not really in much of a rush to move, though. If Peter does, top deck and Abrupt Decay, all of a sudden this game changes in a big way.
Exactly. This might be the turn that Jim brainstorms because, he needs help at this point. Now Peter has dangerous draws.
Jim will draw a couple of cards, Flooded Strand among them, so that's the land that he's looking for, not only to provide mana, but also to shuffle some cards away, as he's got plenty of bad cards in his hand.
There's some dangerous draws here. Peter finds Abrupt Decay that's very good for him. If he finds Wasteland that's very good for him.
Yep. Especially because Jim has just sent back the Stifle. So his hand right now is Daze and 2 copies of Abrupt Decay. Now, if Jim makes it out of this turn, he's doing pretty well. We'll see what the top card is here for Peter. It's a copy of Gataxian Probe, which means it could really become anything. Now, interesting situation here for Peter is that he probably can't afford to alternate cast this, though I'm not sure if there's a difference between 3 and 1 here. As, fetch lands do work their way into the equation.
Yeah, all cast Force of Will, but that doesn't seem to be a big consideration.
Jim going to very quickly sacrifice and go get a Tropical Island here in response to the probe. Now there is the hand. 2 Abrupt Decays and a Daze. And I actually like the sacrifice there. It's an interesting situation, right, where he's sacrificing in case Peter draws a Stifle. But by sacrificing, I mean, I suppose you're just wide open to Wasteland no matter what.
Right. Yeah, there's no way for him to stop that.
Ponder the draw. Abrupt Decay is going to go after Tarmogoyf, which means that Jim's Tarmogoyf can attack. Peter's going to have to very quickly block with his Delver's Secrets. And now we head back Jim's way. Peter will draw a card. Going to cast Gataxian Probe here. Jim's new draw was a Ponder, so Peter will pick up a draw, and he will pick up his graveyard and the rest of his cards in play. So Jim Davis is going to win game number 2 here over Peter Tragos. Sultai Delver Mirror going to go to a 3rd and final one, and you can just see how important it is kind of to jockey for position and definitely sequence your spells and your effects correctly in this matchup.
Mana, mana, mana. That's what these fights are all about here, which is part of the reason that Tassiger seems so good to be in the mirror match. It's a 1 mana play. Once you start game past turn, let's say turn 3 and beyond, now you have a 1 mana play. Very hard to kill, and as you can see, often these players are working with very little in the way of resources.
Yeah, not many at all. It's what I love about Legacy is that a lot of your decisions are very important, and they're bottlenecked in the first stages of the game, turns 1, 2, and 3. And if you make a misstep there, chances are you're going to lose. So it's very important how you sequence things.
A lot of people watching Legacy for the first time that aren't that familiar with the format, it looks weird with the amount of draw for my first turn, think, play a land, say go. And compared to Standard, where you're just like, yeah, I just played my Mystic Monastery and put it into play. Yeah. My turn's over. So much of the game is played inside of your hand and playing around what your opponent's cheap reactive spells are, that even simple decisions on the surface are actually quite complicated.
Part of the reason that Jim Davis was able to qualify for the Players' Championship was his participation in our invitational qualifiers. And you can definitely play in some in your local area as well. All you have to do is get in touch with your local store owner to get these all set up.
Yeah, we have multiple tiers of these, including the Premier IQs that we have here at Open Series, and you can get these at your local store as well. Whether you're looking for just more local events, a route to the Invitational, or a chance to get to the Players' Championship, these IQs help provide that and come with exclusive playmats, dice bags, pins, and SCG premium vouchers for participants and people who make their way to the top 8.
IQs can happen during the week or on the weekends. We've got many different types of them, the premiers, the supers, and just the regular old IQs. But you can find out more information over to StarCityGames.com. Get in touch with your local store owner as well. Not hard to get set up. It's qualified for one of our many invitationals this year. First one, of course, going to be in Richmond for season number 1, where I know we'll be seeing Jim. You can believe that. But now we're going to see him play game number 3 here against Peter. Peter going to be on the play this go around, and the play versus the draw in this matchup is certainly important because on the play you can just kind of get a Wasteland Stifle draw and knock your opponent right out.
Well, certain cards become a lot better on the play. They include Deathrite Shaman, Wasteland, Daze, Stifle, Divert, pretty much the whole deck.
Yeah. Cards that play a very, very big role. And we've talked about a little bit how we expect black cards to make a comeback. Deathrite Shaman, Liliana Veil, Abrupt Decay. But, the reason for that, reason 1 is that Treasure Cruise is gone. I think maybe reason 2 is that because Tassiger is a card now. That might be a reason that you actually just want to play black.
Oh, I think so. I think, the card's so good, especially against these Abrupt Decay Tarmogoyf decks where, every time it shows up, you can see Jim almost be like, well, what am I supposed to do here? I can't attack, and it's very hard for me to kill this thing. I don't know if it's necessarily good in every matchup. The most of the vulnerabilities it comes with is the same with any creature. Yeah, you just kill with Swords to Plowshares or whatever, but it could just be additional copies of Tarmogoyf that elude Abrupt Decay. Yeah. And if that's all you're getting for the card, that's still quite good.
And in some matchups, because not every game is going to go like this, where you're bottlenecked on mana, say against Miracles, that activated ability could actually play a role in the games.
It could. I think that Peter's deck is basically making no effort to maximize Tassiger in that respect, because you see cards like Daze and Stifle and Spell Pierce, which are pretty low impact cards to get back with Tassiger. once you're at that stage of the game. I think it will come up infrequently, but Peter is basically just playing this as a 6-mana 4/5 with Delve.
Using 6 mana.
1 mana.
Yeah, there.
Can't abrupt decay it.
I'd be surprised if he ever pays 2 mana for it over the course of the tournament, honestly. Peter going to be in the play here. He's going to keep his opening hand. We'll see if Jim will do the same. Divert among the cards here in Davis's hand. He'll send it back very quickly, so he'll take a look at 6. About 15 minutes here to go for these two players. Both very methodical in their ways, but they both do quite a bit of winning as well here on the Open Series.
And these games have a habit of taking a pretty fast pace to them once you get past the first couple turns of the game, because there's so much jockeying around Daze and Wasteland and Stifle. Often what happens in these 3-color Delver mirror matches that involve Wastelands is one person's just incapacitated. They get tagged with early Wastelands, the Deathrite Shamans get killed or don't show up, and the other person can win with kind of whatever is left in their hand.
The knockout blow. The Wastelands and the Stifles and the Dazes.
We're back.
Don't even let you play. I'm glad we're back. There's something charming about this for a little while.
It has its highs and its lows.
It really does. It was good to see it leave, but now it's good to see it back.
Right. And we rarely get to see that in Legacy. Really only bannings or huge high-impact printings can change that.
Davis with a couple of lands in hand. 2 copies of Scalding Tarn along with a Tropical Island.
It appears that Jim has his True Name Nemesis here, which is almost like his copy of Tassiker in the matchup.
Yeah.
Very hard to kill. The difference is it's probably better than Tassiker once it's in play. Actually, it's certainly better than Tassiker once it's in play. But getting to 3 mana is not the easiest thing to do here.
Super tough, as we've seen in these games so far. It's funny, we say it's super tough and he has the ability to cast True Nemesis next turn. Right. He has a Scalding Tarn in his hand, but again, there's no guarantee that even happens.
Yeah, if your Deathrite Shaman survives, you don't get Wastelanded and, you know.
Don't get stifled.
Right.
All that jazz is here's a Brainstorm.
It could happen. Could happen.
Peter going to draw 3, put 2 back here in just a moment.
I wonder in the mirror match how much of that kind of stuff are you supposed to have? How much of the stifling and the spell piercing and the cards that keep your opponent off balance or try to stop them from getting to their land drops, but are really, really bad draws once you're out of the initial stages of the game.
It can also be bad draws if your opponent just plays around them accordingly too.
Yeah.
Which some hands they have allow you to and some they don't. But, the Stifle is a high variance card. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's, completely busted beyond belief, and sometimes it's just you draw it and you're just like, oh, this is so bad, or your opponent's draw just didn't cooperate with Stifle at all. I do wonder how many of those you're supposed to keep in after sideboard. I think it really just depends on, where you think your opponent's at, if they're going to leave them in, if they're going to play around them. It's really hard to say.
Right, like look at this. This is not even like Peter's done a ton here to open up the game, but you feel like Stifle on Jim's side of the table is going to be bad now for the rest of the game.
Yeah.
Unless Jim just finds a lot of Wastelands or there's something really weird going on with Peter's draw.
There's a Deathrite Shaman there for Peter. He'll pass the turn back over to Jim. Jim will take a draw step. Pick up a copy of Abrupt Decay. That may be attractive to cast. Well, again, the situation gets really interesting now because Jim does have Abrupt Decay in his hand to take care of Deathrite Shaman, a premier threat in this matchup. But do you do that, or do you say, all right, let's go for True Name Nemesis, try to get it in, though Daze and Force Will are cards you have to be worried about.
Yeah, I mean, he can just try to go for the win here, basically, with a fast True Name Nemesis with protection against Leon of the Veil.
He's just going to go with Abrupt Decay. And now get in here for 1 point of damage. The attack there, also kind of telling, because that means that Jim doesn't have a card like Brainstorm, Divert, none of that stuff. Just getting in his point of damage.
Yeah. Well, there isn't that much reaction you can have here that matters. Divert's really hard to hold up here because there's nothing to redirect a target of a removal spell to.
Spell Pierce might be attractive.
Yeah, Spell Pierce, yes. That's the bluff.
In certain builds of Sultai Delver, Spell Snare. Here's a Tarmogoyf. Saw Peter play a Wasteland before that to play around Daze to the best of his ability. Now he's going to go reaching for the Wasteland, it seems. It will be targeting something. And he'll go after the Tropical Island. So go back Jim's way with an active Deathrite Shaman. He'll take a draw step. Tarmogoyf is what he's found.
Yeah, I'm curious to see when does Jim elect to pull the trigger here on trying to get True Name Nemesis into play. I think it's such a powerful card in the matchup that Jim is not going to trade it for a Daze.
I think he would do everything that he can to not trade it for a Daze. There's Tropical Island being searched up by the Tarn.
If he trades it with a Force of Will, you know, whatever. Something's going to trade with Force of Will, but a Daze here I just don't think he's willing to do.
Perhaps a Decay again or a Tarmogoyf. Looks like he's going to go with Tarmogoyf. So we'll see if that resolves here. Looks like it will.
And as a rule, you know, I like what Jim did that turn, playing Tarmogoyf instead of Abrupt Decay. I think as a rule, you should try to save your Abrupt Decay for a turn where you have 2 mana left over and it will cause you to tap out. Every time you can play your cards that can be countered on turns where Daze doesn't matter, and then save your Abrupt Decay to fill out your mana, it's just good sequencing. It's the best way to play around Daze.
There's another Tarmogoyf. The green machine is back in Legacy. It was gone for a little while.
Yep, you'll see a lot of this.
That card is just too good to be held down. Jim looks like he's going to cautiously untap here. It doesn't look like Peter's going to be doing it attacking. But Jim's going to activate his Deathrite Shaman to remove a Wasteland just to get a card out of the graveyard.
Also, you know, Peter's got Tassiger, so there's already incentive to just go after his graveyard. Occasionally, these kind of decks have, you know, a random Loam hanging out in the sideboard to go off with Wasteland in the perfect matchup. So I think that's a good play there from Jim.
Flooded Strand here for Davis. Looks like that's going to be the land to play. And it is. And he'll sacrifice that immediately. Jim patiently waiting to see if it resolves, and it does. So he'll consult the hand before searching up a land. He'll go with another copy of Underground Sea. Which means that if Peter does find a Wasteland, he would likely go after Tropical Island moving forward. Sometimes you see this deck play a copy of Bayou, but part of the reason that you don't see it as well is because of the fact that it doesn't have for blue mana for Brainstormer Ponder or this card.
Yep.
And that's a Tree Nemesis, and this was the big one.
This is the payoff here. Very hard for Peter to get this off the table. Really only Liliana the Veil allows him to do so. And Jim's got quite a bit of Edict protection built up on his board.
Another card that took a sharp decline in the Treasure Cruise metagame. If this gets into play in these kind of Delver mirror matches or these mid-range mirrors, it can win the game all by itself.
Yes.
And it's in play right now. There's some 3 to 4 Tarmogoyfs on the battlefield kind of staring at each other. And now True Nemesis is out there as well, protection from Peter. And Peter's in some real trouble now as all he can do is draw. And looks like past the turn back, Jim's going to go after the graveyard again, take care of that Pluto Delta.
Yeah, just wants to make Tassiger as prohibitive as possible.
Jim will take a draw step. Murderous Cut, Abrupt Decay in hand. You can add a Scalding Tarn to that.
Yeah, a really powerful hand here on Jim's side of the table. Because all you want at this spot is just creature removal. I'm curious to see if Jim just wants to go beatdowns here.
He's a Goblins player at heart.
Yeah.
Get in there. Show him who you are. True Name's going to get into the red zone.
No, the Goblins really don't beat down. It's a misconception. They kind of beat down.
Don't act like you understand us. We beat down.
They're more about, you know,
It's a little bob and weave, but we beat down.
here's some weird piece of card advantage. Here's a little bit of mana denial. Now overwhelm you in 1 or 2 turns.
Jim's a big fan of Goblin Pile Driver. He beats down. Though it needs a little help.
Yeah.
Peter with a lot of cards in his hand, but he is being kind of just trapped right now by True Nemesis and the inability to attack.
he's getting squeezed from a bunch of different directions right now. Can't attack, can't block with the offense that Jim has with Deathrite Shaman here and True Name Nemesis. And Jim's got a very good hand on top of that.
Here comes True Name again. Days was the draw step for Davis. Just a passing of the turn. Peter will draw.
Peter is now in a spot where I don't even think he can really play around anything anymore.
No, I don't think so either.
He's got to catch up. He's dead in 2 turns.
Yeah. A tough situation here, too, because he's looking at so many cards in his hand. And you would think that would give him the advantage, but Tree Nemesis is just the kind of card that just basically says, I don't really care what you're doing.
Yep. I mean, Liliana and minus it, even if it resolves, is not a very good play here.
Yeah. Delta being sacrificed. Jim going to act as though he has a stifle, but that will resolve. And there's an Underground Sea.
An active player finish your turn, then take up to 5 additional turns to complete your match. Once again, Legacy Open players, that is
So we'll see what Peter can put together here, but I don't see a lot of lines of play here for his deck. There's no Toxic Deluge, there's no big sweeper.
There's a Flooded Strand. Perhaps Liliana. I'm going to Dismember. Don't see that one often.
Yep. And you can understand some reservation here as he knows Jim has Divert in his list.
Yeah.
And this is really bad news. But if this resolves, it's a starting point.
And it's going to resolve.
Peter can try to get to a point where he uses a removal spell on Deathrite Shaman. Then his Liliana can get the True Name Nemesis. And that's a plan.
There's an Abrupt Decay. So there goes the Tarmogoyf. And now it looks like Jim is content with taking the damage here from this one, as he's currently winning the race. So Davis will draw a copy of Brainstorm. Not a bad place to start, so he will cast that. Take a look at 3 cards here, and of course put 2 back, though Peter will think briefly before letting that resolve. A Delver of Secrets, a Brainstorm, and a Flooded Strand of the cards drawn there by Davis, as we have about 3 minutes left to go here for these players. Two cards will go back here for number 2 on our Season 1 leaderboard for 2015. Very, very important tournament here for Jim playing. It's a great player early here in Tragos in the mirror match, though he is ahead at this point.
And Jim's got a really nice sequence here lined up where he can play a Delver of Secrets, leave up Deathrite Shaman activation, still has access to Daze and Murderous Cut at a moment's notice.
All good things, it seems.
Yeah, just demanding a lot here from Peter and giving him very little time to do it.
Peter will untap those 3 lands as well as that Tarmogoyf, and he'll take a draw step. There's Gataxian Pro being hard cashed yet again. The hand here is Cut and Brainstorm. Murderous Cut, you have to imagine a card we're going to see a little bit of too.
I was about to make the same comment. I thought that Murderous Cut was a little underplayed initially. Week 1, people didn't have the Treasure Cruise builds of decks, and I still thought the Sultai deck should have been messing around with 1 or 2 in the sideboard because it's so efficient for that list. Now I think that the cat's out of the bag with how good the delve spells are in general. We're going to see more murderous cuts. There just aren't a lot of marquee cards in Legacy that Murderous Cut kills that Abrupt Decay fails to kill.
Okay.
I think if you see more 4 and 5 mana creatures show up, you're going to see a lot more copies of Murderous Cut.
More Taskers, perhaps.
Tassiger is a very good reason. Though the same types of decks that would play Murderous Cut would also play Tassiger. So and you only have so much graveyard to work with, but the point stands. I think we're going to see more copies of Murderous Cut in the format, and it's going to be sooner rather than later.
I think we're just going to see an influx of black cards now,
Yeah.
given how things have changed. And so that brings along with it quite a few cards. Murderous Cut among the bunch. There's Liliana the Veil. But I think if Jim has set things up accordingly, Liliana the Veil's not really going to play a role in things here, with Peter down to 5.
Yep.
Peter going to gamely play on and hope that Jim does make a mistake, but Jim's going to consult his hand of Murderous Cut and Brainstorm. He also knows the top cards of his deck as well, so the likelihood of that Delver flipping seems very high, as Liliana's going to tick down and force Jim to sacrifice a creature. He'll activate Deathrite Shaman and put Peter down to 3, and Peter will extend the hand. Jim Davis going to win this match here over Peter Tragos. 2-1. The Sultai Delvermere belongs to number 2 on our Season 1 leaderboard here for 2015. And we'll see if Davis can keep things going. Nice start for him off.